Good morning once again, everyone. Welcome to Disaster Risk and Disaster Readiness and Risk Reduction. We are already at our 16th week, and for week 16, our topic is about another continuation from week 15, which is concept of disaster risk reduction and disaster risk reduction management. So, for this week, we will know the four themes in disaster risk reduction management framework and also prepare our own disaster kit. So once again, this PowerPoint presentation was prepared by Sir Jamal Anthony O. Garcia. So let's proceed to our discussion. We have the Community Preparedness Plan. So the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan aims to provide policies, plans, and programs to deal with disasters in the Philippines. It also serves as the principal guide to disaster risk reduction and management efforts to the country. The framework envisions a country of safer and adaptive and disaster resilient Filipino communities towards sustainable development. So these are the four themes in disaster risk reduction management framework. We have the first one, disaster prevention and mitigation. The second one is disaster preparedness. The third one is disaster response. And the fourth one is disaster rehabilitation and recovery. So for the definition of terms, let's first discuss disaster prevention. So disaster prevention is the outright avoidance of adverse impacts of hazards and related disasters. It expresses the concept and intention to completely avoid potential adverse impacts through action taken in advance, such as construction of infrastructure to eliminate certain risks, land use regulation that do not permit any settlement in high-risk zones, and seismic engineering designs that ensure the integrity of building in an earthquake. For disaster mitigation, this is the lessening or limitation of the adverse impacts of hazards and related disasters. Mitigation measures encompass engineering techniques and hazard resilient construction, as well as improve environmental policies and public awareness. For disaster preparedness, the knowledge and capacities developed by governments, professional response and recovery organizations, communities, and individuals to effectively anticipate, respond to, and recover from the impacts of likely, imminent, or current hazard events or conditions. Disaster response is the provision of emergency services and public assistance during or immediately after a disaster in order to save lives, reduce health impacts, ensure public safety, and meet the basic subsistence needs of the people affected. And disaster rehabilitation recovery is the restoration and improvement where appropriate of facilities, livelihoods, and living conditions of disaster-affected communities, including efforts to reduce disaster risk factors in accordance with the principle of Build Back Better. And last is the rehabilitation. And rehabilitation is the measures that ensure the ability of affected communities and or areas to restore their normal level of function by rebuilding livelihood and damaged infrastructure and increasing the community's organizational capacity. So basically, these are the terms that you need to remember for disaster risk reduction and management plan. We have disaster prevention, disaster mitigation, disaster preparedness, disaster response, disaster rehabilitation and recovery, and rehabilitation. So mainly, uh, for this one, we have we have organizations and specific departments in order for disaster prevention or for the four teams. So for the first one, we have DOST or Department of Science and Technology. So they are for the disaster prevention and mitigation. So the goal for this one is to avoid hazards and mitigate their potential impacts by reducing vulnerabilities and exposure and enhancing capacities of communities. The next for disaster preparedness is the Department of the Interior and Local Government. So of course, kailangan prepared and ma-anticipate lahat ng mga possible hazards. So their goal is to establish and strengthen capacities of communities to anticipate, cope, and recover from the negative impacts of emergency occurrences and disasters. So this is for Department of the Interior and Local Government. For disaster response, we have the DSWD, or the Department of Social Welfare and Development. So of course, since they are the one who will first provide life preservation and meet the basic subsistence need of affected population based in acceptable standard during or immediately after a disaster. So very common. Siguro naman narinig nyo na tong DSWD. So, and the next, for next team that we have, which is the Disaster Rehabilitation and Recovery, we have the National Economic Development Authority, or the NEDA. So itong NEDA, ang goal nito is to restore and improve facilities, livelihood, and living conditions and organization capacities of affected communities and reduce the disaster risk in accordance with the Build Back Better principle. So mainly, they want to restore people means of livelihood and continuity of economic activities, also restore shelter and other installations, and reconstruct infrastructure and other public utilities, assist in the physical and psychological rehabilitation of persons who suffered from the effects of disaster. So these are the four themes for disaster risk reduction management framework. So we for disaster prevention, mitigation, disaster preparedness, disaster response, disaster rehabilitation, and recovery. So the next that we have is the survival kit. So very important tong survival kit kasi ito yung magiging emergency or disaster kit natin, especially pag kailangan maging prepared ka in order for you to avoid such potential hazards, or just in case magkaroon na nga ng hazard, at least you know what to do and you are very organized and you are very prepared. So uh, disaster kit items are commonly found in households already, such as flashlight, batteries, crank-operated radio, food, water, and blanket. The kit must be very organized, easy to find, and easy to carry, and should be checked every 6 months to make sure the items are in good condition. So the following, we have water, food, tools, and personal effects hygiene kits, important family documents, and money. Lalo na sa mga, sorry, ang na, ano tayo, let's go to our, let's go back to our slide. So, nandito na tayo sa ating survival kit, di ba? So, once again, for the survival kit, we need important family documents and money. Pero usually, yung iba, I don't know kung ginagawa nyo to, pero kami hindi kasi syempre, minsan yung mga documents ginagamit mo din kasi. So, and also, first aid kit, that is very important. So, syempre, in your handout sa PDF file, we have the water, food, ano na lang, kindly refer to your handouts or PDF files for the important information. Also tools, important family documents and money, personal effects and hygiene kit, very important din to, and first aid kit. So I will show you a video discussion about our survival kit, para mas maliwanagan tayo kung ano ba dapat yung mga ilagay natin, especially pag nandyan na ang hazard. So, let's go to our discussion.
During a disaster, who do we call for help? And some quick facts on disasters occurring here in the Philippines. Without further ado, let's start. So, what are the things we need to prepare beforehand? First and most important, water for drinking and sanitation. Food, at least 3 days supply of non-perishable food, and battery-powered radio, cell phone with chargers, and backup batteries for contact purposes. Flashlight, in case it gets dark. First aid kit, whistle, mask, wipes for personal sanitation, local maps, and finally, a plastic sheet and duct tape for shelter purposes. Next, what to do before, during, and after a disaster. Before a disaster, you should first create an emergency plan for your own family at home. Make sure that everything you need is easily accessible in case of sudden disasters. Also, you should be knowledgeable on what protective measures to take before, during, and after evacuation. This is for preparation for whatever type of evacuation that will be carried out in your specific area. Lastly, you should put into mind your local emergency contact numbers, or better to list them and place it where you can easily see them, in case a disaster strikes and your family needs immediate help. The earlier you call, the faster you'll be taken care of or rescued. Now, during a disaster, first thing you should always put into mind is to stay calm. Because if you are calm, you think more properly and you make more wise decisions that would reflect on your actions. Next thing you need to do is wait for further instructions and follow your area's protocols on how to evacuate. This is to ensure that everyone is safe and no one will go missing. Finally, after the disaster strikes, you should find a safe place to stay and check in with your local officials for their instructions. Second, before you return home, you should make sure it is safe, and only do so when your officials have instructed you to. If you encounter problems financially, reach out to your local service relief organizations for assistance. Most importantly, check in with your family members, ask them about how they feel, and comfort them when needed. This is important so that each member would know how to cope with their feelings after a disaster. Now that I have told you the things you need to do before, during, and after a disaster, here are the contact persons you need to list down in case of an emergency. Number 1, your immediate family. Number 2, your local barangay. Number 3, the fire department. Number 4, local police stations. Number 5, your local hospital. And number 6, your national emergency hotline. And in the Philippines, it is 911. Make sure you keep a list of these contact numbers in your home in case of an emergency. I will now be providing you with some quick facts related to disasters in the Philippines. First, the Philippines is situated within the Pacific Ring of Fire, a 40,000-kilometer-long U-shaped fault zone in the Pacific Ocean, making us vulnerable to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Second, aside from the COVID-19 pandemic, 2 major disasters have recently occurred in the country: Typhoon Ulysses and the Taal volcano eruption. This halted public life, business, and mobility, which greatly affected the Philippines' economy. Third and last fact, the local government units in the Philippines are the ones responsible for rehabilitating the society and rebuilding infrastructures from the aftermath of natural disasters that come into the country. According to a recent study, disaster risk mitigation expenses for rehabilitation and recovery in the Philippines were the largest government expenditure, totaling to approximately 16.2 billion pesos. That's all for this video. I hope you've acquired a thing or two on how to deal with disasters, especially here in our country. Just keep in mind that it's always better to prepare now than fail to do so once the worst has come. So stay safe, everyone!
sakuna. Kaya naisipan din namin gumawa ng sariling emergency bag. So, gusto namin i-share sa inyo kung ano-ano yung mga importante para sa tingin ko na importante na kailangan natin ihanda. So yan guys, ito yung laman ng aming go bag. Share namin sa inyo. Ayan. Una, syempre, ayan, itong medical kit natin. Ayan, meron tayong agua oxinada para sa sugat, panglinis ng sugat. Meron tayong betadine, iwas infection. Meron tayong alcohol na hinanda. Efficacent oil. Ayan. Next natin. Ayan, buksan natin. Meron din kami hinanda mga medicine. Ayan. Meron tayong paracetamol. Ayan, meron ito for maintenance. Niready na natin. Ayan. Aqua tubs. Panglagay sa tubig na iinumin. Para safe. So, sa lahat dito, puro gamot po yan. Ayan. At meron din tayo, ayan, gamot, mga ano pa rin,
Medical kit
medical
or first aid
kit.
kit pa rin po.
Mhm.
Yan, so napapansin niyo po, nilagay namin sa ziplock bag para po hindi siya mabasa kung umuulan man po.
Meron tayo, hinanda. Ayan, sunblock. May Vicks na rin.
Para pag nagkasipon,
Mhm.
hindi nahihirapang huminga.
Tama, ayan, meron tayo
Band-aid.
face mask. Importante yan. Meron tayo ayan, cotton
balls. Yan.
very good. Ayan, huwag kalimutan ang
Thermometer.
ayan, baka may lagnat or ano, at least ma-check agad. At meron tayong para sa
Meron tayong mosquito repellent patch para po layuan tayo ng mga lamok kasi mahirap na.
Ayan, meron akong ni-ready rin ng nail cutter para sa, for example, masalugsugan ka na hindi mo inaasahan, meron kang pang-alis. May nail cutter tayo, guys. So,
Ready,
ayan.
ready.
Next natin ay nahinanda. Ayan, meron tayo
Hygiene kit naman.
So, ang hinanda ko, ayan, meron tayo dito, ayan, yung ano lang, sachet na toothpaste. Ayan, siyempre kung may toothpaste, dapat may toothbrush ka. Ayan, may toothbrush. Tatlong toothbrush. Meron tayong, alam mo naman pag girl, ayan, dapat ready ang tissue. May
Tissue
tissue
or
tayo.
wipes?
Oh, wipes. Yan, dalawa yan. So, yan mga naka-ready. For the girl pa rin, mayroon tayong napkin. Yan, alam mo naman, hindi natin, alam mo mga ganap. Meron akong niready ng isang powder.
Powder detergent po.
And meron din shampoo, conditioner, ilang peraso lang. Ayan, eto, yan, mga ganyan. Ready ko na yan. At sabong mabango. Ready tayo. Ayan, meron tayong sabong mabango. So, yan yung para naman sa ating hygiene. Tapos, next, na meron tayong ni-ready ay, so dito sa bag na to, meron na talaga kami hinanda. Hindi na namin inaalis. Meron tayong power bank. Kaya nitong mag-charge ng 4 na cellphone. Yan, 4 na cellphone ang kaya nito. So, yan, ihanda rin natin yung mga ganyan. Tapos, kasama yan syempre, yung cellphone na, call and text lang talaga. Call and text lang. Ito, chine-check lang namin to kung kung okay pa siya. So, nandyan na lang, nandito na talaga siya. Nakalagay siya dito. At, syempre may charger. Ayan, may charger na kasama. Ayan, magkakasama rin. Meron tayong battery. Ayan, meron tayong flashlight. Para ito in case kailangan, meron kang magagamit. Kasi kailangan mo, tapos wala kang nakahanda, yan, battery para sa flashlight. Lighter. Kaya tayo may battery. Meron talaga akong maliit na radyo. Ito, yan. Hindi ako nawawala ng radyo. So, ito, hindi ko na ito muna nilalagay sa bag. Kasi lagi ko itong ginagamit sa araw-araw pag nakikinig ako ng balita. So, meron akong ganito. Pwede itong, pwede siya sa di kuryente, pwede din siya lagyan ng battery. Kaya tayo may handang battery. Kailangan natin maghanda guys ng damit para kahit pang ilang araw lang. So ito, para to kay Bon. Yan, naka-separate yung kanya. May dalawang t-shirt. Yan, para sa 2 days pwede to. Yan, para kay Bon. Tapos naman ito. Yan. Yan, para naman kay Nicole. Yan, for 2 days din. Meron siyang t-shirt at saka underwear, ganyan, nakaayos din. Ready natin yan. Okay. At yung para naman sa akin. Yan. Meron tayo ditong Bible. Naglagay din ako ng Bible dyan. Kailangan natin yan. Tapos, meron tayong tuwalya. Yan, nag-ready rin ako ng tuwalya. Meron tayong tuwalya. Kasi yung tuwalya pwede mo nang gawing kumot. In case. Dito pinagsama-sama ko yung underwear naming mag-ina. Yan, sama-sama na siya dyan. So dito, naglagay na ako ng cash dito para if in case na emergency nga, may cash ka na. At syempre, huwag natin kalimutan magdala ng grocery para kailangan
Natin kalimutan si God.
At huwag natin kalimutan yung mga importanteng papeles. Kung meron man tayong mga papeles na kailangan mo agad-agad na kunin, naka-ready na sila. So ito guys, lahat ng laman nito, yan. Yung mga importanteng papeles nandito na. Lahat birth certificate, yung mga lahat na mga kailangan na importante, i-save nyo na, i-save na natin. At kailangan huwag nyo rin kalimutan na mag-xerox ng mga birth certificate nyo, yung mga IDs. I-xerox nyo na kasi if in case na kailangan, handa tayo. So lahat to, yan, lahat ng yan, nandito na lahat. Okay? Kasama na siya dito sa go bag. Dito sa gilid, yan, meron tayong flashlight na malaki.
Siyempre, hindi mawawala yan.
Ayan, bakit ako may ball pen ako. Ball pen and pentel pen kasi nga 'di ba kung may mga kailangang fill upan, o di ready ka pa din. Yan, ready. Tapos dito sa kabilang bulsa, meron tayong yan, pito. Yan. Plastic na pito. Ayan. Okay. So, yan. Meron tayong handang ganyan. Dito sa bulsa, kasi sa bulsa to, kabilang bulsa. At meron din tayo nakahandang tactical knife. In case na kailangan ulit, handa ka. Kasi kung kailangan mo tapos hindi ka handa, is problema yun. So, yan guys. Ito yung laman ng aking go bag. Number 1. Ayan. Wala na siyang laman. Okay na siya. Ayan.
So, ito naman po ang aming go bag number 2.
Ayan. So,
Ang laman po ng go bag number 2 namin is where's the zipper?
ayan.
Dito naman po is meron po kami mga raincoats. Ayan. Raincoats po, dalawa. Ayan. Kasi po syempre kailangan natin pag umuulan para hindi po tayo mabasa. salamin po ni Mama para po pag mag-fill up ng mga kailangang fill upan. Syempre po. At ito naman po sa pinaka-main, nalalagyan niya is mga pagkain po. So, meron pong mga candy. Yan. Pangtawid gutom po habang wala pang mga relief goods para hindi po tayo agad-agad magugutom. Syempre. Meron naman po tayong mga pwedeng instant meals like lugaw po. Ayan. Nilalagyan lang po ng mainit na tubig para hindi po tayo gaano magre-rely sa relief, para meron pa rin po tayong makakain habang wala pa. Meron po tayong mga easy to open canned foods. Ayan po. So, nakita niyo po siya. Easy to open po siya kasi tatanggalin niyo lang yung lid niya. Ayan. So, ayan pa po. Dapat po easy to open lang para makakain natin agad. At saka yung mga lutong na po. Meron din tayong mga biskuit. Yan po. Para hindi agad-agad magutom. At syempre, hindi po mawawala ang tubig. Tubig na inumin. Ayan. So, dalawa po yan. At meron po tayong mga plastic utensils. So, ayan. Puro foods po ang laman ng second go bag para hindi tayo masyadong mag-rely sa mga relief goods. So, yun po ang laman ng aming second go bag. Ayan po, nakita niyo po, wala na siyang laman. Ayan po. So, sa lahat ng paghahandang ito, wag po nating magkakalimutang magdasal, alalahanin si Lord, kasi po, siya po ang laging nandyan para sa atin. At dyan po nagtatapos ang aming vlog for the day. Please like and subscribe to our channel at i-hit ang notification bell para ma-notify ka kung may mga bago kaming videos. Bye!
So that is for our survival kit. So once again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask us. And this is for our week 16 lesson. So thank you so much once again. Thank you, Sir Jemuel, for this PowerPoint presentation. So thank you, everyone, and see you on week 17.